It's Sulin, your hormone naturopath here. Today I'm going to be talking about endocrine disrupting chemicals, the menopause, and how they meet. So, what's coming up in the research on the effects of endocrine disrupting chemicals on menopause? This could be your menopause. It could be your menopausal symptom intensity. It could be the timing of your menopause. And it could be the way that these chemicals are affecting all of those symptoms that sit in the surrounding area, the surrounding picture to your menopause. So in this video, first we're going to go to what is perimenopause, what is menopause, because we're looking at the effects of these hormones on women at this particular life stage. Next, we're going to talk about what endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs, or hormone disruptors are, and what the challenge is that they place upon our endocrine systems. From there, we're going to move into the research and talk about the effects of endocrine disrupting chemicals on 4 different aspects, 4 phenotypes of menopause. These are the ones that are coming up consistently in the research, so I have good information to share with you today. For all of your hormone information, please check out the rest of my videos and feel free to like and subscribe. I appreciate your support. And if you do have any questions, comments, anything you'd like me to discuss, please pop a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. So let's move on and talk about endocrine disrupting chemicals and the menopause transition. Hello and welcome to Well Woman. It's Sulin, your hormone health coach, and thank you for tuning in. If you're looking for the latest advice on women's health, food, mood, tips, hacks, and all the hormone things, you've come to the right place. I hope you love this episode. Let's get to the show. Let's look at perimenopause and menopause. Perimenopause, if you break the word down, literally means peri, around, menopause, the menopause. So it means the timing around the menopause. Therefore, perimenopause doesn't start and stop and then you get menopause. Perimenopause is the lead-in period, which could be anywhere between 4 to 8, maybe longer years for you, for women. And it's where you have some sorts of menopausal symptoms emerging. So perimenopause doesn't start at a particular age. It begins when the symptoms start. We could be talking about hot flashes, night sweats. We could also be talking about headaches, migraines, weight gain, sleep disturbance, all of those other symptoms that occur in the lead up to menopause. The time when you actually achieve menopause is when 12 months have passed since your last cycle. So technically, perimenopause incorporates menopause because it's the lead up to that time frame where the 12 months have passed since the last cycle. Now you are technically a menopausal woman. And then perimenopause continues because remember, it's the timing around. So it continues for another year afterwards. Why would we classify it this way? Because the symptoms don't just stop. You don't just achieve menopause and then all the symptoms go away. The symptoms, many of them will reduce because the lead up to menopause has a lot of hormonal fluctuation. That really is the underlying driver for many of perimenopausal symptoms such as anxiety, temper, loss, and those sorts of things. So those hormonal fluctuations definitely a big part of perimenopause. In menopause, there are other things that, as women, we need to contend with. So we're still working on some of those surrounding symptoms at that stage. So that's perimenopause and menopause. And if you want a very rough age range, perimenopause starts to begin in, say, the early 40s. But symptoms have been found in studies as early as 30s. 30 years old, you can have some menopausal symptoms. And in my clinical experience, there's no distinct age at which you enter perimenopause. It all goes by the symptoms. many of the symptoms I'm seeing emerging in women younger and younger. So we're talking about the late 30s starting to get night sweats. That's not uncommon. Please don't feel like you're alone if you're a woman in your 30s and you're starting to wonder, am I sort of getting towards menopause? Truth is, you're probably encountering a little bit of hormone challenge and burnout, and you're starting to get some of those signs of the hormone system entering into the perimenopausal phase a little bit earlier than maybe, would be ideal. Next, we're going to move on and define endocrine disrupting chemicals. Then we're going to move further into the research and what we know about the effects of endocrine disrupting chemicals on menopause. So endocrine disrupting chemicals are basically ubiquitous chemicals. They're prevalent. They're everywhere in our environment. If I look around the room that I'm in right now, I can see plastics here. I can see, of course, my computer with all the chemistry that's gone into creating that. I can feel electromagnetic fields as I'm recording this and streaming it. I can just imagine, even in my beautiful Kuan Yin statue, there would have been sprays on her when she entered into Australia. There are so many different chemical influences in our environment that no matter how careful we are, we find it really hard to avoid. There's actually a phenomenon of apathy when it comes to environmental chemicals or hormone disrupting chemicals because they are so hard to avoid. And they're invisible. We can't see them. So these chemicals are present all around us all the time, and they are having an effect on the way that our hormones work. This is the derivation for the term endocrine disrupting chemicals. So providing that it is a chemical that's prevalent in the environment, you're getting exposed to it, and it's affecting the way that your hormone systems work, we are talking about an endocrine disrupting chemical. Other words are used to describe them. So hormone disruptors might be used and endocrine disruptors might be used. Often the abbreviation EDC is the most common way they're described. It's an easier way to refer to them. So I'm going to use EDCs in the next part of this video. So we've talked about menopause. This is a natural ovarian aging process that all women go through. We've talked about endocrine disrupting chemicals. Now we want to see what the evidence is telling us about the interplay between these two things. So next up, I'm going to talk to you about 4 different phenotypes of ovarian aging. That's what perimenopause is. It's ovarian aging. And those 4 phenotypes are the 4 different aspects of ovarian aging that have been extensively studied by scientists and researchers in relation to how EDCs are affecting them. So while we cannot cover every single aspect of hormone disruption, we can certainly look at 4 of them that have been researched, and I can't wait to share with you all this information because knowledge is power. So let's move on. Let's talk about the 4 phenotypes. So when we talk about ovarian aging, we are talking about all women going through a transition process to reach menopause because the ovaries are going through an aging process, and eventually they will approach senescence, which is when the ovaries don't work anymore. The first phenotype we're going to talk about is a change in menstrual regularity. This is really common in perimenopause, where the menstrual cycles get longer, shorter, the bleeds get heavier or lighter. And we're going to talk about which EDCs have an effect on menstrual regularity. One of the main effects that a lot of EDCs have on the actual menstrual cycle is to shorten it. As soon as you start getting shorter menstrual cycles, you start to wonder what's going on with my luteinizing hormone, what's happening with all these extra bleeds that I'm having. Am I having a breakthrough bleed or am I having another cycle? And this is quite a common experience in perimenopause anyway. So we now have this additional effect of EDCs. 4 EDCs have been found to affect the menstrual cycle length by shortening it. These have been proven in human studies. The first of them is parabens. The second is the PFOS and PFAS. These are chemicals that you often find in your cooking pans and pots, things like that, non-stick and so on. The other ones are the PCBs, the polychlorinated biphenyls. So these are the ones that have been found to shorten the menstrual cycle length. Other chemicals have been found to have some effect on menstrual bleeding. So there is already in perimenopause a tendency to have very heavy bleeds. And as you might be, or as women approach menopause, those bleeds get quite crazy, and then eventually they will start to lighten out. So some of the chemicals, let's have a look at these, that have an effect on the actual bleeding style. I've noticed that some of them also are associated with fibroids. So we could potentially be talking about chemicals that lead to estrogen excess, and that then builds up the bleed in the first half of the cycle, leading to extra heavy bleeds by the second stage of the cycle. So here, in terms of affecting this actual bleed amount or the bleeding style, we're looking at two heavy metals. You're probably well familiar with them. The first one is mercury. Mercury has been associated with effects on luteinizing hormone. In fact, it probably has a bit of a suppressing effect on luteinizing hormone. This has been found in human studies. Lead has an effect on fertility. That's been known for quite a while. And also lead is correlated with, lead exposure is correlated with earlier menopause timing. In terms of bleeds, lead and mercury both are associated with an increased risk of fibroids. For women in perimenopause, this should be making you think about how heavy your bleeds are. And if you're noticing that they're getting heavier and heavier consistently, then I would be looking at reducing your heavy metal load. Let's move on and have a look at the second phenotype of ovarian aging. So this one I'm so interested in because we are noticing an earlier onset of menopause symptoms and also earlier onset of menopause itself. This might be relating to conditions known as premature ovarian insufficiency and premature ovarian failure. But we're going to focus on the timing of menopause and the EDCs that are associated with affecting that timing of menopause. So two chemicals of note when it comes to reducing the age at menopause. So this is often referred to as the natural menopause age, or age at natural menopause, ANM, in studies. It refers to the age you are when you achieve menopause. For many women in Australia, America, Europe, this tends to be around about 52 years of age. We're doing actually pretty well in terms of the timing of menopause. It can be quite a bit earlier, in other parts of the world. So this can be affected, which means that no matter where you are in the world, if you have chronic exposure to these chemicals, you can be bringing your menopause on earlier. The first of them is the PCBs, which we talked about before, as affecting the bleeding and the menstrual regularity and the length of the cycles. The second one is pesticides and dioxins. So we have known for a while that pesticides affect our health. A lot of early studies dating back to the late 1980s in America mainly have looked at people's perceptions of pesticides. People are concerned about pesticides, even that's the last almost 40 years. But some of the newer emerging chemicals like phthalates, parabens, PFAS, PFOS, these are not so well known. Studies on how much we know about these chemicals shows that actually we know very little. And there have been certain studies conducted in the last 5 to 10 years that have shown as little as maybe 15%, 17% of people and health professionals have very little knowledge of these EDCs. So in terms of early menopause timing, watch out for pesticides, dioxins, watch out for also your phthalates and your non-sticks. These are things that you'll get in plastics around your house and in non-stick surfaces. Also, possibly in your clothing. And a big source of phthalates, by the way, is in your perfumes. So if you use a perfume where the aroma lingers for a long time, that's a pretty good sign you've got phthalates in there. So ideally, use essential oil perfumes. Use something where you have to reapply it every couple of hours, and at least that will give you the reassurance that you're less likely to have phthalates in there. Now, phthalates are associated with menopause aging or age at menopause because they are associated in human studies with premature ovarian failure, premature ovarian insufficiency. You have to wonder, why would they do this? So there is one researcher who I have to mention. Her name is Jodie Flores. Jodie Flores has run a number of studies in conjunction with other amazing people. I cannot mention everyone, but there's a team. So if you start looking at some of these studies, you will see these names. We've got Flores, we've got Neves, we've got Inman, we've got also just amazing people who are contributing to research. And I'm so sorry because I'm sure I'm neglecting to mention quite a few. You look at this diagram, you can see that a number of these chemicals are affecting every stage of follicular development in the ovaries. And this is all very important for ovarian function. And the closer you move to ovarian dysfunction, reduction in function, the closer you're getting to ovarian senescence, which is menopause. So we have the PCBs in there. You can see the parabens in there. You can see DEHP, MEHP. These are referring to phthalates. And you can also see BPA. We haven't talked about BPA yet, but we're going to because it's a big one. So in terms of the early menopause aging, PFAS, PFOS, lead is also associated with early onset of menopause, pesticides, and your phthalates. Let's move on to the next phenotype of ovarian aging. This one will affect many women who are wanting to fall pregnant in their 40s. So remember, perimenopause usually begins in the 40s, and it is the beginning of the ovaries starting to wind down. So your fertility level at this point is already going to be greatly reduced. And I remember reading some years ago that fertility is around about 14% in terms of your success rate in your 40s. And that means that, maybe think about other options to support your fertility at this age if you're wanting to fall pregnant, because time is of the essence. You want to make things happen quickly. But that aside, because that's not what this video is about, prolonged fertility times, difficulty conceiving, reduction in the number of oocytes, their quality as well. So we're talking about making the body subfertile. That's the next phenotype. And let's look at which EDCs are associated with this in research. There are three that I want to mention here. The first one is heavy metals. So exposure to heavy metals and having heavy metal accumulation in the body is related to this infertility, subfertility aspect of ovarian aging. The second one, we're going to return to the phthalates now, the plasticizers, things that make plastics soft. So these are associated with infertility, and both heavy metals and phthalates are associated with fertility issues in human studies. I'm really going to try to limit this discussion to human studies, even though there are, of course, amazing insights from animal studies. And many of the researchers I mentioned before have been conducting studies on animals. So there is research from that, but I'm going to try and limit what I'm talking to you today about to human studies. So we've got pesticides as well. Pesticides are linked to many factors that influence fertility, such as reduced ovarian reserve. You might have, if you're trying to have a baby at some stage, had your Müllerian hormone checked, anti-Müllerian hormone. That's what we're talking about, having low counts of ovarian reserve. Pesticides are also associated with taking a longer time to fall pregnant and less ability or less success with implantation. Now we're going to move on to the last phenotype of ovarian aging. So this last aspect is where we're going to return to talking about what's happening in the ovaries as the ovaries start to become senescent. We're talking about things like how many follicles are there, how many are maturing, Do we have changes in the hormones in the ovaries, estrogen, inhibins, progesterone, luteinizing hormone? What's happening with the actual stages of follicle development, which is known as folliculogenesis? This is the last aspect we're going to talk about in this video, about how EDCs are affecting the menopause experience. There was one key chemical I said we would return to because it's a big one, BPA. This stands for bisphenol A, and there are other types of bisphenols as well that are being used as substitutes. Be aware that some studies are looking at the safety of these other substitutes, and the evidence conflicts. Some say that the other substitutes are slightly safer, but not 100% safe. Others say that the other substitutes are the same or potentially even more harmful. So we have to be aware when we look at labels such as BPA free. That doesn't mean BPS free. That doesn't mean that we haven't got some other types of bisphenols that are being used. They're a big one when it comes to affecting the stages of follicle development in the ovaries. So remember, I showed you on this diagram before that BPA shows up at a number of these stages of follicle development. Now, it might seem like, well, what's the big deal? We're obviously going to get a follicle to mature at some point. The big deal is that in order to produce your hormones, estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, your inhibins, etc., in order for them to function properly, you need to have good ovarian function. And the moment that some of that function starts to get impacted, you see unusual things happening. For example, we're not ovulating anymore. We're not producing progesterone anymore. We're not sleeping well. We're not handling stress. We're getting really heavy bleeds. Those bleeds are flooding because we don't have progesterone to control the rate of the bleed. There are a lot of nuances with hormones. So as soon as we start getting these interruptions with ovarian function, we start to see symptoms emerging. The BPAs are a really big one in human studies that have been linked to disruptions in follicle development. Okay, what else have we got? We've got phthalates. Certain types of phthalates are associated with lower follicle counts in the ovaries. This means fewer follicles for your ovaries to work with if they're trying to produce a really healthy egg for fertility purposes, and also to ovulate, because if there's no ovulation occurring, we don't really get a proper luteal or second phase of the cycle. So also in human studies, phthalates have been shown to affect your hormones. So let's just focus on a few of them because we can't cover every single one of them. But estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are really key hormones for women, particularly as we get into the 40s because we start losing bone mass, muscle mass, and increasing visceral fat mass. And what you notice alongside that happening is that estrogen, progesterone, testosterone are usually falling. In terms of progesterone, it's dramatic. It's a big drop. Estrogen, it's up and down, and then it's a crash. Testosterone, it's a gradual decline, and then eventually it builds up later on in postmenopause. So what happens with each of these? The phthalates can lower the levels of estradiol, which is your main estrogen, active estrogen here, and progesterone and testosterone. What does this mean for us in perimenopause and menopause? It means we're having issues with our skin, issues with our body weight, metabolism, fat mass, issues with our bones and muscles, building muscle as we exercise. And if you've ever done your weights, done your walking, done your cardio, and you feel like your body is still really soft, we're talking about the inability for your body to build that muscle and to build that strength. That's related to testosterone, estrogen, and these hormones. So, those are basically the main hormones that are affected here. There are more, but a lot of them are animal studies, so perhaps I'll do a longer video and talk about that another time. Let's wrap up here, and just as some parting words of guidance, I want to come back and record a video for you on what the research is showing on herbs, nutritional strategies you can adopt to mitigate some of the effects of these chemicals. It's not an easy process to correlate the chemicals with conditions. So the research that's come out here is really fantastic. And I take my hat off to the researchers who've done the work given us all of this information to look at and work with. But because these chemicals are invisible, and because sometimes the science is a little bit imprecise, it can make us feel a bit despondent, like what's the point? We're never going to be able to avoid these chemicals. And, what's the point of even trying to? The thing is that, yes, we can't avoid them 100%, but we can reduce the impact. And the more you reduce the impact, then the easier it's going to be on your body as you move through the perimenopause and menopause. So I hope this was interesting. Please do like and subscribe and stay in touch. Follow, because I do have more videos coming out. This is an area that I'm looking at the moment in terms of my postgraduate studies. I'm doing some research studies at the moment. So I'm really excited to be sharing this information with you. And I also hope not to make it overwhelming. So please know I have lots more information coming where we'll talk about some solutions and some ways that you can reduce exposure. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening to the Well Woman podcast. The information, opinions, and advice in this podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice, and it's for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not always be those of the host. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon in another episode of Well Woman.